Since you're just a freeloader, at least do some babysitting, you useless thing. My sister, Katie's voice, pierced through the living room like a sharp knife. For a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. The calm afternoon air suddenly turned cold and tense. The house was quiet that day. My parents had gone to the hospital since morning and said they would be home late. I finished breakfast alone, opened my computer, and started working. I dealt with email replies, organized materials, and began preparing for the next presentation. I focused on the numbers and text on the screen, my fingers continuously typing away on the keyboard without pause. I had finally gotten into the groove and started to immerse myself in work. Suddenly, a cheerful doorbell rang, and when I looked at the monitor, there was my sister Katie, beaming with a big smile. "Mary, long time no see." Beside her stood 3-year-old Hannah, and in Katie's arms was 1-year-old Alex. When I opened the door, Hannah rushed toward me and clung to my legs. At that moment, Katie handed Alex over to me and said, "Sorry, I suddenly got called for work. Can you watch them for just a few hours? I'll come back to pick them up by lunchtime." Before I could say, "Wait a minute," Katie placed the kids' things at the entrance and with a quick, "You're really a lifesaver," jumped into her car and drove off. Left standing at the entrance, I sighed, cradled Alex again, and went into the living room with Hannah. For the next few hours, I fed them snacks, played with blocks, changed Alex's diaper, and comforted Hannah's fussing. I could hardly focus on work, and somewhere deep in my heart, my frustration towards Katie grew. In the evening, Katie finally came to pick me up. Without a care for my exhaustion, while putting the children's shoes on, Katie said, "Hey, Mary, I have a little favor to ask." I felt a tightness in my chest. Was my bad feeling about to come true again? "What favor?" I asked, trying to sound calm, and Katie replied as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Just 3 days a week. Can you look after Hannah and Alex? I have a lot of babysitters, but on the days I work, I have no one to leave them with. Mom and Dad are getting old, so they can't help physically, right? You're home all day, so you must be free?" I was at a loss for words. "Katie, I'm sorry. I'm home, but I have work, so it's difficult for me. Can't you find another babysitter?" When I firmly declined, Katie's smile vanished from her face. "Huh? What are you saying? You're a freeloader, so you should at least do that. You useless piece of garbage." Katie's voice pierced me like a sharp knife. Then she looked down on me and said, "Do you know how hard it is for me while you're at home relying on your parents? And do you know how much it costs to hire a babysitter? You wouldn't understand since you're single and living off your parents. Katie, I'm contributing properly to this household. In fact, I'm the one paying for our living expenses." Before I could finish my sentence, Katie interrupted me. "That's all lies. You came back home because there's no rent to pay, right? As a freeloader, isn't it just a little bit okay for you to help me out? We are family." She glared at me as if implying that she was the only one suffering. I didn't say every day, so 3 times a week shouldn't be such a big deal, right? I frowned and shook my head. "It's not about the frequency. I dislike the way you impose this on me as if it's a given without any discussion," Katie replied with irritation. "Then what am I supposed to do? My parents are helping us financially and you aren't doing anything?" I took a deep breath and looked straight at Katie. "Katie, listen. The money your parents were giving you was left over from what I had given to mine for living expenses. So, essentially, I've been the one providing support. Also, you say life is tough, but isn't the part-time money you earn being spent on your own purchases rather than the kids? If you really want to safeguard your living, you should first reevaluate that. From now on, live on your own money." Katie froze for a moment, but still seemed to doubt my words. "And stop treating me like a free babysitter. If you leave the kids here without permission again, I'll report you to Child Protective Services." Katie's eyes widened for a moment, and then she laughed provocatively. "Oh, really? Go ahead and try it if you can." With that, she took the children and left. "I'm serious, you know?" I didn't know if my voice had reached her. In the messy living room, only the scattered blocks and the coarse anger lingering in my heart remained. I had returned to this house a few years ago. My father retired early due to a chronic illness, and my mother started accompanying him to the hospital more often, making our household finances suddenly tight. Even when my mother started working part-time, it wasn't enough to make ends meet. Around that time, my IT-related company that I started was finally starting to take off. Fortunately, I had ample financial leeway, and I had no hesitation in supporting my parents' living expenses. Now I have turned a room in my home into an office, where I can manage online meetings and project progress all from here. Without the need for a commute, it has become easier to balance work and home life, allowing me to continue my career while supporting my parents. Yet, despite that, here I am, the one supporting this household, being called a freeloader by Katie and ultimately being burdened with her children. I felt something deep inside me collapsing with a sound. Katie's husband works hard, but his income is never sufficient. Even though they are barely making ends meet each month with a mortgage, car payments, and the cost of milk and diapers for the children, Katie spends her part-time earnings on brand name clothes and cosmetics. I later found out that Katie had repeatedly turned to her parents for help, crying out for additional living expenses. One day, while my mother and I were putting away our shopping, I found a ledger for living expenses on the table along with an envelope addressed to Katie. Curious, I asked my mother about it, and she sighed as if to concede. I'm sorry, Mary. Katie insisted she was in trouble, so we scrimped on our own living and gave her some support. My parents could scarcely manage on just their pensions and my mother's part-time income, and they had been stretching my contribution to living expenses just to help Katie somehow. They cut back on the electricity bill, and my mother would buy in bulk on sale days or hop from supermarket to supermarket, searching for cheaper items to save money on groceries. However, my parents shouldn't have had to struggle like that in the first place. If Katie had used her part-time earnings for her children rather than spending it on clothes and cosmetics, she wouldn't have needed any help. Still, for the sake of their grandkids, my parents continued to reach out to Katie. When I discovered that this support came from my money, I was overwhelmed with a mix of anger and sadness, rendering me speechless. I have repeatedly convinced my parents, don't spoil Katie anymore. But my mother shook her head, saying, I can't abandon my daughter in trouble. And my father said, at the very least, I don't want my grandchildren to suffer, ignoring my words. I supported the household finances because I wanted my parents to live with some peace of mind. It wasn't meant for my younger sister. That night, I could hardly sleep. I swallowed down the simmering anger deep in my chest many times. The fact that my parents were managing my living expenses to help Katie, and that Katie had never once shown gratitude, even to the point of calling me a freeloader. If I weren't there, this house would have long been cut off from electricity and my parents might have been living in thinness. Thinking of that reality made me furious at Katie's attitude. A few days later, after finishing the morning meeting and closing my laptop, I suddenly realized the silence in the room. My parents are not home again today. My father is at the hospital for his usual checkup, and my mother is with him. I am the only one in the house. The moment I thought that, something stirred deep in my chest. Should I go out before this uneasy feeling becomes reality? Just then, a cheerful chime rang. I felt as if the commotion in my chest had manifested as sound. The Katie on the monitor wore the same smile as before. In her arms was Alex, and at her feet was Hannah. I hesitated for a moment, but in the end, I opened the door. Good morning, Mary, a bright voice echoed. However, behind that brightness, there was an unpleasant premonition lingering somewhere. I have an urgent matter today. I'm counting on you for the kids, she said, placing the children's backpacks by the entrance and handing Alex over to me without waiting for my response. Katie, you said it right. If you're going to impose them on me without permission... Yes. It's a call to CPS, right? Katie interrupted with a laugh. Go ahead and try if you can. You think you can just tell our parents, don't you? With that, Katie left in her car. I stood there and took a deep breath. Something deep inside me definitively switched. In the next moment, I picked up my phone and dialed CPS's number. Hannah and Alex looked up at me curiously. It's okay, it will be over soon, I said as I pressed the call button. My anger was still hot, but my voice was surprisingly calm. Is this Child Protective Services? I have something to report regarding a situation where children were left behind without permission. A calm female voice came through the receiver. I accurately explained the situation. My sister left the children behind without my consent. She's been forcing me to babysit for free. She is trying to use me because I live at home with my parents. I emphasized that I do not live with my sister and bear no legal or moral responsibility for her children. The woman who answered the phone was calm and professional, reassuring me that calling was the right decision. She continued to politely confirm the situation, asking several questions with the safety of the children in mind. Are the children safe right now? Yes, they are both playing inside the house. After hearing my answer, the staff confirmed my address and name, stating that they would come to check the scene if necessary. In the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Appearing were a calm-looking female staff and a male staff member with documents in hand. We are from Child Protective Services. We have come to follow up on the report. I guided the two of them into the living room and quietly showed them Hannah and Alex, who were napping. The staffs checked the children's health and briefly scanned the room for safety before turning to me. Could you please tell us the details of what happened? I took a deep breath and explained the events one by one. How the children had been left unattended, that I had warned her in advance, and that the same thing had happened again today. The female staff nodded while taking notes and finally said, "We will provide guidance to the guardians today. When Katie returns, we will talk in her presence as well. Is that all right?" I nodded without hesitation. Please, I don't want this to happen again. In the evening, I heard a car and saw Katie appear at the door. "Sorry I'm late," she said cheerfully as she came in to get the children's things. At that moment, the woman's staff, who had been sitting on the sofa in the living room, stood up. "You must be Katie?" Katie's feet stopped and she asked, looking confused. "Huh? Who?" a male staff member said in a calm voice. "This is Child Protective Services. We need to talk about today's incident." Katie hurriedly tried to put on a smile, but her lips were trembling. "Wait a minute. Mary, did you really call them?" I nodded quietly. "I warned you last time, didn't I?" The atmosphere in the living room suddenly became tense. Katie's gaze wandered and she gradually lost her words. However, the female staff member began to explain the situation matter-of-factly. "Katie, you left two young children in the care of someone without consent and left the scene. This constitutes neglect." Furthermore, she informed Katie that not only had she put me in an unjust situation, but also Hannah and Alex, and that this fact of neglect would be recorded. Katie desperately tried to argue, saying, "It's a misunderstanding. My sister said she would take care of them." She started spinning a tale about how I had broken a promise, despite me actually consenting. I just sat on the sofa, observing the situation. The female staff member showed no sign of being flustered and immediately interrupted Katie. "No one, especially without consent, should be forced into caregiving. Your argument holds no legal weight." The glare Katie directed at me was strong enough to put a hole in the wall. It was as if someone who thought they were invincible suddenly realized they had hit a wall with an unexpected outcome. I remained calm, just leaning back on the sofa. It is her who is being lectured, not me. And then I was further pressured. In addition to setting up a formal follow-up meeting with Katie and her husband Tom, Katie was ordered to attend parenting classes forcibly. Katie, who thought pushing her children onto others was a brilliant plan, now has to take lectures from experts on the basics of responsible parenting. I struggled to suppress a laugh at the irony that was bubbling within me. I could feel the anger that had been swirling in my chest gradually calming down. After Katie left, I sighed deeply while picking up the scattered toys. I thought that I had finally drawn a line. The days of being tossed around by Katie's convenience would end today. My parents returned home from the hospital about an hour later. I heard the sound of the front door opening and my mother's voice saying, "I'm home." I paused my cooking and took a deep breath. If I didn't say it now, it would be postponed again. "Welcome back. How was today's examination?" I asked, to which my mother replied, "It was okay," while my father took off his shoes with a slightly tired expression. After waiting for my mother to hang up her coat, I began to speak. "I'm sorry to bring this up just after you got home, but I have something to discuss with you both. It's important, so I hope you listen." My mother looked at me in surprise, but silently sat down on the sofa. After my father looked at my face, he slowly took a seat as well. "Starting next month, I would like to arrange for living expenses to be directly deducted from my account. I will no longer be giving cash," I said in a calm voice. "So, I want the support for Katie to end as well." My mother blinked and said a little flustered, "Mary, what suddenly happened from next month? We talked about it before, but Katie is really struggling right now. She's working part-time and doing her best." "Mom," I quietly interrupted her words. "The money I'm putting in is for this household. It's for utility bills, food expenses, and living costs, not for handing over to Katie. I know how much both of you are trying to save, and that's why I've continued to support you, but I can no longer overlook this. My father opened his mouth. Without support, it won't just be Katie who struggles. Hannah and Alex will also be in a tough spot. I don't mean to say I don't want to help either. My voice unintentionally grew a little stronger. But I can't stand being treated like a freeloader without any gratitude. My mother looked at me in surprise. Is Katie really saying that? My father frowned as well. What do you mean by being treated like a freeloader? I took a deep breath. Katie makes it sound like I'm just living here for free. I explained that I contribute to the living expenses each month, but she doesn't believe me and just says whatever she wants. My mother fell silent, looking down while my father pressed his lips tightly together. After a moment of silence, my mother sighed softly. I had no idea that was happening. That's why I've decided to stop the support so that we don't repeat the same thing again. My mother thought for a while before saying, I understand, but we need to talk to Katie directly too. Yeah, let's sit down and have a proper talk with Katie this weekend, I said with determination. This weekend, the whole family gathered in the living room. My father and mother sat side by side, and I sat across from them. Katie was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed. The atmosphere was a bit tense. I took a deep breath and opened my mouth. Today, I have something to discuss with Katie. To put it plainly, I think I'm going to stop helping Katie financially. Katie looked at me with a surprised expression. Huh? What is that? Why do I have to hear about my parents' money from you? It doesn't make sense. It's not my parents' money. It's my money. I looked directly back at Katie. I've been patient for a long time, but I've reached my limit. I think it's time for us to stop using the living expenses that my parents have saved up to support you. Katie, still with her arms crossed, raised her voice in irritation. What do you mean by that now? You're going to stop helping me and stop babysitting? Then what the hell are you even doing in this house? Just living your life and doing your own work while ignoring me when I'm in trouble? Is that what you call family? I slowly exhaled and placed a piece of paper on the table. Katie suspiciously took the paper in her hand, and the moment she read it, her expression changed. Wait, what is this? Why do you have this? Katie gripped the paper with a pale face. My mother looked at me anxiously. Mary, what kind of document is that? I silently took out 2 more copies from my bag and offered them to my parents. This is the notification that arrived by mail from CPS a few days ago. It was addressed to me, the reporter, and it documented that an official record had been created along with the contents of guidance given to Katie. I thought it was necessary to show it to my family, so I made a copy. CPS, Child Protective Services record. This is from the day Katie left the children without permission. My mother hesitated for a moment before taking the paper and glanced over it. What, a record from Child Protective Services? What does this mean? Her voice trembled. I reported it, I answered quietly, because you didn't listen despite being warned multiple times. My mother gripped the paper tightly, speechless. Breaking the silence, Katie muttered in a small voice. Mary exaggerated. I just had them watch for a little while. My father slowly raised his head. Katie, he said in a low, heavy voice. Katie jolted slightly. Do you really think just watching for a little while wouldn't leave a record with CPS? My father's eyes were serious. You left your children behind. Have you ever imagined how much trouble Mary had? Katie was at a loss for words. My father continued. You must have known that Mary was contributing to our living expenses and supporting this household. To call her a freeloader and push the children onto her? Are you not ashamed as a parent or as a sister? Katie looked down and bit her lips. She might want to retort, but pushed down by her father's words, she couldn't say anything. My mother slowly opened her mouth. Katie, Mary has been supporting this family ever since your father retired. The reason we were able to help you was because of Mary. Stop relying on her any further. Katie said nothing. After Katie left, I sat on the sofa and sighed deeply. I finally felt as if a burden had been lifted from my shoulders. The weight I had been carrying for a long time seemed to be gradually unraveling. The irritation and tension that had been stuck deep inside my chest were finally calming down. I was finally free from Katie. I even had that feeling. A few days later, my smartphone vibrated. The screen displayed the name Tom. He is Katie's husband. I hesitated for a moment, but pressed the call button. Mary, do you have time? Tom's voice sounded somewhat tense. I heard from CPS. I also heard it from Katie, but honestly, I can't believe everything. I want to hear it directly from you. I accepted his request and arranged to meet him at a nearby cafe after his work. I sat by the window, waiting for Tom with a slightly lukewarm coffee in front of me. Soon he appeared and took a seat across from me. I took out the CPS notice from my bag and placed it on the table. While watching him silently go through the documents, I exhaled deeply. It has officially been recorded. Here's the copy. Tom's eyes widened. I knew there had to be a record. I was supposed to have received a notification, but I was never shown it. Either Katie hid it or threw it away. In any case, I couldn't confirm it. He carefully took the paper in his hands and read on silently. His expression grew more serious with each page he turned, and eventually he let out a deep breath. Katie said it was just a bit exaggerated, but this is no joke. I'm sorry for putting you through this. Tom said this in a low voice, his profile tinged with a sense of determination. As I watched him, I felt a slight sense of relief spreading deep within my chest. Yet there was still something troubling me. Actually, there's one more thing I want to tell you, Tom. When I said this, Tom leaned in slightly. I began to choose my words carefully. Katie was receiving financial support from her parents, but that money was what I had been giving to my parents as living expenses. My parents tightened their own budget to the limit and gave the remainder to Katie. Tom's eyebrows furrowed slightly. I continued my explanation. Last weekend, we held a family meeting and decided to stop this support. I've talked it over with my parents, and we agreed that I will no longer support Katie through my money. Tom gasped in surprise. I had no idea this was happening at all. He looked down for a moment and, after a brief silence, said in a low voice, I thought I was managing Katie's part-time wages all along. Even though I didn't know, I truly apologize. I shook my head. It's not just your fault. I just wanted you to know it as a fact. Tom nodded deeply and replied with a serious expression. When I get home, I will talk to Katie properly again. I nodded slightly, feeling a bit relieved. I think that's a good idea. Tom smiled a little tiredly and stood up from his chair. I also stood up and left the cafe. After the family meeting, Katie completely stopped showing her face. According to what my parents said, Katie was working more part-time jobs and somehow managing the household finances. However, the daycare was full, and external babysitters repeatedly refused due to CPS records, leaving both parents exhausted. A few weeks later, on the weekend, the doorbell rang. The faces of Katie and Tom on the monitor looked somewhat stiff. When I opened the front door, Katie bowed deeply. Mary, I'm really sorry for everything until now. Tom nodded beside her. I apologize too. I also bear responsibility for leaving everything to Katie regarding the children. I guided the two of them into the living room and sat down quietly. Hannah and Alex were being looked after by their parents in the next room. Katie kept her head down and hardly spoke. There was a hint of remorse in her expression. Instead, Tom opened his mouth. Mary, I came to consult with you today. Tom started in a calm voice. Before that, I want to apologize. I'm truly sorry about the support and the children. Katie has regretted that day ever since. Right now, we're both taking parenting classes together. Bit by bit, we're trying to change for the better. Katie, who had been looking down, spoke in a thin voice. I'm sorry, Mary. I nodded shortly and waited for them to continue talking. After taking a breath, Tom got to the main point. So, about my request, would it be possible for you to officially take care of our children as their babysitter? As long as you follow the conditions. Of course, we will pay you a fair wage. Actually, we have CPS records, and we've been turned down by external babysitters multiple times. Right now, we really have no one we can rely on. After hearing Tom's words, I fell silent for a while. The faces of Hannah and Alex came to my mind, and my heart was filled with conflict. I never want to feel like I did back then again. However, it's also a fact that they are in trouble. Sensing my hesitation, Tom continued in a soft voice. I'm not asking for 3 days a week. just as long as it doesn't interfere with your job. Katie remained silent, but her clasped hands were slightly trembling. I could sense her remorse through that. I took a deep breath and looked at their faces. Got it. If you follow the conditions, I'll lend a hand, but I will never allow things to be handled the way they were back then. Tom showed a look of relief, and Katie muttered a small, "Thank you." After seeing them off to the entrance, I returned to the sofa and sat there for a while, unable to move. To be honest, I didn't feel ready to forgive my sister right away. There are still lingering feelings deep in my chest. However, when I think about Hannah and Alex, I can't turn my back on them. They have done nothing wrong. I slowly stood up and made some coffee. Now, I will judge whether Katie's actions have really changed based on what she does from here on out. Once I made that decision, I felt a little lighter in my heart.